Hi, this is Money Flow Mel with FLOWrensics, and I want to go through how to utilize options flow to be able to identify areas of sector rotation, especially when you've had a larger pullback. I love to be able to see where you actually have larger money being put to work or if there are any themes developing. Seems like this last pullback that we had did bring a lot of sectors in. We needed that. Uh, but now from that, we could always certainly find new opportunities. So let's just jump into a few of these sectors that we're seeing some potential rotation. I'm going to first start off with IHI, which is the med device ETF. We had a little activity come in last week. It was on the 16th. It was kind of small, but it was interesting in the sense that the med device sector has really been hit pretty hard. You had a bigger pullback even before the overall market started to pull back. And it's also not a name that we see very often. So something like the SPY and the Qs, you're going to see every day because, of course, we have so many expirations and 0 day. I'm really looking for those gems and those one-offs that you just tend not to see, because if you can see where you have sector rotation or where you have specialty groups, you can start then looking at the individual names. Of course, you can certainly trade the ETF, but sometimes I find you have better leverage and get bigger moves by knowing what the top holdings are and actually looking at where you have opportunities and trade setups or options flow coming in to those individual names. And for example, IHI top holdings, TMO about 16%, so very heavily weighted there. ABT 14.5%, another larger top holding, and then you drop down to MDT with 8%, and then ISRG down to 7%. And those names in and of themselves can make some really nice moves. They have nice average true range. So just kind of up to you and what you like. Also, some people may just prefer to play commons, and maybe ETFs are what you like to trade. And here you have an opportunity there to also, of course, options or commons, whichever preference that you have. But knowing that we had a little interest come in, yellow on our system means that it's an opening position, that it's exceeding OI. And then yesterday, it was the 21st, we actually had some larger size come in, sticking with the same line. So when you kind of start to see some back to back or tack on here, you have somebody coming in and building a position. They stuck with the 915 52 calls, added another 450,000. So collectively, you've got about 700,000 positioned here. I will say I think this is relatively shorter dated because they're really only going out to the next monthly OPEX. And when I see that, it makes me think of more like bounce opportunities, just an oversold bounce. And we did also see activity in the individual names. I do just want to make sure that you are making OI verification part of your due diligence. BlackBox has a feature to where you can actually track the open interest. So I do want you to see that when this position originally came in on 8/16, they came in with 1,000 contracts. The next day, when OI verified, they did actually settle, so they stayed in the book. And then you had the activity from yesterday. Again, we increased by 5,300. So this position is still here. And I think that's important to actually track. Something else that I personally like to look at is, where you have seasonality and taking a look. I like to use Equity Clock. They do have some features for free. I think you could look up a few charts, but this is interesting to me because you have us coming off of August to where you have just come sideways action consolidation. And then you do see a little bit of a ramp up into mid-September, interestingly enough, where they position mid-September before you have a larger pullback. So just kind of an overview of seasonality, just something else I like to do, as a double check. Let's take a look at the chart here. You are coming into pull this back over here. You have had, you can see this larger drop, and that's why I think we just kind of maybe looking to kind of have an oversold bounce. Of course, we've got the 8 EMA, 21 and 200 kind of lined up there. There have been smaller positioning in some of the individual names. Some of what I've seen today, they're pretty active, and DXCM, that is one that can definitely be a mover. We did just have MDT report yesterday, pretty solid ER there, starting to see some volume come in. We do have a larger position out to October in this one in the 95 calls. You've got over 3 million. They are still positioned there after being underwater. And, sometimes you just see some things that you just have to look a little deeper. This is one that I actually got into today after seeing some flow. CUTR. Wasn't really sure what this one was. That's why I like to have FinViz up to be able to actually look and see what the chart looks like. And then also what caught my attention immediately once I pulled this up was that this is in the med device sector, and also one that is heavily shorted. So you have a smaller flow. 20 million is not a large flow, and you've got almost 24% of that short. So when you have a sector that can potentially move, a rising tide lifts all boats. You have the potential to be able to, even some of the stuff that wouldn't normally be your go-to can start to see some interest. And again, we did have a little flow. It was more speculative, but I thought that was interesting considering that float structure. Um, so worth looking at these ETFs. Today, this afternoon, we started to see quite a bit of flow into KWEB, the 2950s. I'm Central Time. And one thing that I like is when we start to see some flow come in, that you have that contract price constantly increasing as they continue to come in. That shows you that's interest, that's buying. This is very clean, all coming in on the ask, and you have them 41 cents up to 43 cents. Collectively here, you've got 332,000, that's 7.9 thousand contracts into the 2950s. This is a little bit out of the money. Again, positioning into the monthly. And I'll tell you some of what I was concerned about with even looking at some of the China names was a larger position that I knew that we had in Yang. Yang being another ETF, and it's actually 3 times leveraged China Bear. They started to come in there and actually built a large position into the January 19, 2024 $10 calls. And you've got well over 2 million in this position because they came back the next day and added. That stops me. Like when there's that kind of size into something that's like a 3x leveraged, first off, it's extremely unusual. On the run up in China names, we had open repeat call flow in yin, which is the China bull. So like seeing that, but then if we start to see the inverse and where we have positioning in the bearish, I definitely pay attention. So it was kind of hands off of China, but did start to notice that they are closing out of this position. I knew that was something that was lingering, so wasn't really looking to long that until I maybe saw some of this position exit. And again, this was over 2 million. Plenty of time here, but they are starting to exit this position. I updated that yesterday. They are not completely out, so I'll go ahead and show you what that open interest looks like. But you can see how little volume is actually in this change. So here we've got like a little bit of a historical look. That's why I like being able to track this, to have those day over day changes. And instantly this tells you how thinly traded. You just don't see a lot of volume in Yang or Yin until they start to get aggressive. And once they came in, you had the volume add. They came in again, it added. They took some off on the 18th. We've got a little more that came off yesterday. So where you had a larger, almost 19,000 contracts, you're starting to see some of that decrease, and we now currently have 7,900. So they're coming off of that, going ahead and taking the profit there, locking some of that in. So knowing that we have that, I think it's interesting now that we are also seeing KWEB and KWEB coming in, which is a nice mover. We do tend to see a lot of activity there. But usually what we see is a grouping. And sure enough, right after we had KWEB, they also came into FXI. This was right after they positioned there. They were coming into the 915. Again, I like seeing that like this, they're sticking with the same expiration. There's that theme there, right? 915, they came to the 29 calls. That is out of the money. Positioning with 306,000. It's 15,000 contracts. But if you look just a little bit closer, you actually had a larger risk reversal, bullish risk reversal for 915 as well. They came into the 2485. So this is positioned in the money. Not anything wrong with that. You tend to have your institutions positioned in the money as opposed to out. 3.1 million there, and they came in and wrote the 2485 puts, collecting 560,000. That kind of helps to cover that long side. That is a bullish risk reversal. So you kind of have a few things coming through and checking off that box. And when they get aggressive in China ETFs, we tend to see them all. Right after coming into KWEB and FXI, you now have ASHR. Again, that 9/15 expiration. So they're keeping some consistency there with where they want to be positioned. This is another opening position, the 27 calls, current spot 25.96. Again, a little bit out of the money. These are cheaper contracts, 240,000 behind that, 10,000. Now, ASHR, FXI, KWEB. KWEB, I think, is probably your most liquid, tends to get the better moves. But really, what I like to do is to be able to use that for information. I think that Baba, Baidu, and some of what we have come through in the individual names get you that better leverage, especially if you are trading options. That being said, not only are we starting to see this, but mentioned this morning, some dark pool activity coming in. We did have quite a bit. I think it was just about 2 million into BABA yesterday. We also had PDD and BEKE. So let's just kind of take a look at where we're at with the ETFs. You can see a few areas of support for FXI and for KWEB. ASHR is the one that kind of broke trend, not holding up as well. So worth keeping, some of these China names on watch. I'd still like to see a full exit in Yang and know that that position has completely closed. I think they're kind of just piecing out of that. One thing that is interesting and worth noting is although we have some of this interest coming into the ETFs, we aren't aggressively seeing that call side in a bunch of the China names, which they tend to really get aggressive. So keep your eyes open there. Make sure you have your levels set up. Of course, everybody's trading with different time frames. Some of us are scalpers, some of us are looking for that bigger move with a swing. But I think it's worth at least getting a few of these China names back on your radar, knowing that we have quite a bit of activity in the ETFs. And while you may be seeing areas of where you have sector rotation in, usually you're going to have sector rotation out. I know that the moves in XLE and XOP, those oil and gas names, they've been on a tear, have gotten quite a run. Just kind of what I'm looking at here. Oops, let me see where my chart is on this. Here, XOP and XLE. So you didn't quite make that higher high. You made a higher low. You've got a little bit of a pennant here. This has been on a really nice run. Perhaps this is where, we see some money rotate out of, at least come back a little bit, test some key moving averages. And I'll tell you, again, it's just positioning for a lot of 915. Well, actually, XLE, a little bit mixed. Let me kind of start with what we had yesterday. So this is some historical activity. And I was kind of thinking this would be an area where we'd continue to see some strength, especially with weakness in the overall market. But they did come in positioning out to January into the 76 puts. This was a sweeper with 1.89 million behind it. That was significantly out of the money. So to be this far out of the money, almost 12 points out of the money, and putting 2 million behind it, that is a little bit different. That catches my attention. Don't really care to go that far out of the money, positioning maybe something you're a little bit more comfortable in, or just using it again for information. Larger size there, a little bit unexpected. And then, of course, today we had a little bit more come in. First catching my attention was this XOP. Again, I'm Central Time. This was 10 minutes before the last hour of the market. And they did get pretty aggressive into the 915. So we're seeing this theme here where there's just a lot of concentration in this next expiration, not really willing to put themselves too much further exposed, not really coming in with time, but it kind of can give us that little bit of, a bounce or pullbacks and just kind of see some other areas of the market besides tech get some attention. You got XOP 915, 143 puts. This is a little bit out of the money. 146.66 was the spot price when they came in, and they didn't stop there. You've got larger size here, 254,000, 124,000, 102,000, and then a big old block, 676. You've got over a million here. I consider that pretty short dated considering you're only 1 month out. Every time they came in ask or above the ask with that contract price moving up. So XOP, XLE, I hope this is something that you all are doing, because while those are extremely liquid, sometimes what you can find is the individual names, again, offering you that better leverage. So let's say you just really didn't know XOP. Let's take a look there. I like to use bar chart. They have a very nice setup and do show you over here the top 10 holdings. You can see by the percentage here that you are extremely evenly weighted. Everybody's getting their share of the pie. 2%, 2%, 2%, 2%. But let's take a look at XLE because you do have a little bit of a different structure there. And when you have such a heavier weighting, those are the names I like to tend to look for and see what else we have coming through in those individual names. One thing I did want to side note that I do really like as you're getting more familiar with some of your ETFs, I like when they show you your leverage. Some people just prefer to trade the commons, and knowing where you've got some leverages to be able to take those moves can be very helpful. So you've got the ERX, which is 2x bull, and then ERY, 2x bear on energy. That's going to be the XLE bull and bear. But scrolling down, when you look at the components that make up the XLE, you are heavily weighted, very heavily weighted, with Exxon being 21%. That's huge for an ETF. Chevron not too far behind, 18%. But then you see the dramatic drop to where you have most of these other holdings, although still within the group, just not as heavily weighted. So when it comes to XLE, that's a very liquid ETF. You can certainly trade that, but I like to be able to position in either Exxon or Chevron. I went through and was surprised to see, although we have the ETF flow coming in, we're not yet seeing that bearish positioning in those individual names. And that's something that I really like to be able to take note of, because this activity here is not something that everybody's looking at. Most people are just more focused on the individual names. I think that tends to give us a heads up, or at least say, hey, pay attention here. So hopefully this is helpful to you to be able to look and find those opportunities. I know most people don't look at ETF flow. I think it's something worth adding to your arsenal so that you can see where you have potential sector rotation. And then from there, going into the individual names. Thank you so much for your time.